Can you imagine a bunker 2.5 times the size of a baseball stadium, filled with German workers, producing submarines 24/7, one submarine every 48 hours? This is the story of Bunker Valentine, and I'm not telling the story because of the history and technology that is fascinating me, or the fact that the Allied forces have been aware of this bunker since the first day but waited for several years with the destruction. I'm telling the story because it made me really sick on how the people who built this construction have been treated. But let's start at the beginning. I recently went to a flea market and bought this book for less than a cup of coffee. And in this book, I discovered a series of pictures that I couldn't get out of my mind. On those pictures, you can see a submarine being attacked by a plane, a destroyed dry dock with submarines. There's also a technical drawing of a submarine, some weird looking and huge elements that look like somebody cut a submarine in half. There's also a picture of Karl Dönitz standing next to a huge engine. And there are also pictures of a construction site. At first glance, those pictures look like typical photos of a construction site of the World War II period, similar to many I've seen before. But upon closer inspection, something appeared off. The workers and equipment looked unusually small, almost as if they've been shrunk. Have a closer look on those pictures. Do you see how huge the structure is? People and equipment look so small, but I don't think that's an optical illusion. It's just a gigantic construction. I did some research and figured out that the structure being built is Bunker Valentine. The bunker is 1,398 feet long, 318 feet wide, 89 feet high, and the roof and the walls are up to 15 feet thick, designed to withstand heavy bombardment. But why was this bunker even considered to be built? In September 1939, the Allied forces started a massive bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. The primary target was to cripple Germany's military industry by attacking steel production facilities, coal mines, synthetic oil plants, ball bearing factories, and any other kind of factory producing parts for aircrafts or vehicles. Literally any kind of factory that was involved in the production of war vehicles or weapons. Back at that time, the Ruhr area and cities like Schweinfurt, Augsburg and Regensburg have been the center of military industry and therefore heavily targeted. Of course, this type of heavy bombardment also had a huge psychological effect on the German population. Due to its geographical location, the United Kingdom was the perfect base for Allied military operations against Nazi Germany and the main starting point for aerial attacks against Germany. But being a relatively small island country, it was heavily dependent on imported goods in order to sustain its population and ongoing war efforts. Roughly 1 million tons per week of raw materials, weapons and other goods were necessary to sustain its population and military forces. In order to cover the demand, the United States and other Allied forces started to supply all of those goods by organizing merchant ships into convoys escorted by naval vessels. Germany quickly realized that these attacks have been very successful and posed a real threat to their own war objectives. They also have been aware that they will inevitably lose the war if they couldn't stop those attacks. Being technologically advanced, they soon figured out that submarines can be an appropriate countermeasure, and they started to deploy submarines in the Atlantic, leading to a devastating number of sunken cargo ships. The German Wolfpack tactic was a key naval strategy used by the German Navy during the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarines would independently operate and patrol vast areas of the Atlantic. When encountering an enemy target, they would not immediately attack, but report the speed and position of the target to other submarines close by. Those submarines would then form a wolf pack and start a coordinated attack from multiple directions on the target, totally overwhelming the defense capabilities of the convoy. The losses on the Allied side have been devastating. A total of 3,500 merchant ships have been sunk during the Atlantic battle. Early in the war, this Wolfpack tactic was highly successful and was leading to a significant loss of merchant ships and supplies. However, the Allied forces started to develop countermeasures. At first place, escort tactics have been adjusted, but even more important was the technological development of radar and sonar. It allowed the Allied forces to better detect German submarines, even by night, and easily destroy them. The hunter becomes the hunted. Another important success was the decryption of the Enigma machine. German submarines would report their speed and position to each other, but also to the German headquarters by using an encrypted code. Being able to read the code, the Allied forces now had the exact location of the submarines. It made it possible for them to bypass the convoy through dangerous areas and also effectively attack the submarines since they already knew the exact location. The Allies managed to turn the tide of the war with their technological development and were able to sink 783 submarines and 47 surface ships throughout the Battle of the Atlantic. Knowing that the superiority of the Wolfpack in the Atlantic is lost, there have been some submarine crews that started to surrender. The losses were so significant that the German High Command needed to find a solution. Let me introduce you to Karl Dönitz. After the war, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison at the Nuremberg trials, but during the war, he was a well-respected admiral of the Kriegsmarine. Knowing the Germans would lose the war if the situation in the Atlantic would not improve, he was running out of time and proposed to build a better and technologically more advanced submarine. Nur ein U-Boot, das nicht mehr auftauchen muss, um seine Batterien wieder aufzuladen und das sowohl eine hohe Geschwindigkeit als auch eine lange Ausdauer unter Wasser hatte, könnte unsere Aussichten in der bevorstehenden Schlacht verbessern. And the idea of the Type 21 was born. Knowing many high-ranking officials, he established this idea rather quick and also discussed this topic personally with Hitler. Hitler was finally convinced that the Wunderwaffe U-21 could re-establish the superiority in the Atlantic and supervised the project personally starting in 1942. After it was agreed that the Type 21 is the new Wunderwaffe and would possibly turn the war in Germany's favor, there was still one major problem to be overcome. During the Battle of the Atlantic, there have only been a few shipyards capable to build the Type 21 submarine. Those shipyards, located in France, Germany and Norway, are of course known to the Allied forces and also targeted during the bombing campaign. So a new solution needed to be found, and another high-ranking official came up with an idea. Albert Speer was Hitler's chief architect and later on Minister of Armaments and War Production for Nazi Germany. He introduced two novelties, the first one being that the assembly of Type 21 will take place in a huge bunker that was designed to withstand Allied bombing raids and guarantee a constant supply of submarines. The second novelty was the introduction of pre-produced segments, which was a new production method at that time. Those segments were basically pre-produced pressure halls, including all relevant equipment for that section, such as the engine, batteries, and all sorts of pressure pipes. The big advantage of this method was the decentralization of the production. Segments could be built in different locations, such as Hanover, Hamburg, and Danzig, and later on be only shipped to Bunker Valentin for assembly. The Kriegsmarine planned to produce one submarine every 48 hours, which is incredibly ambitious even with today's technology. Unlike a conventional make-to-order dry dock for ships and submarines, the bunker was designed like a modern assembly line in a car factory. In total, there are 12 workstations for the assembly. The pre-produced elements would have been introduced in the first station, worked on, and then moved as a group to the next station. This meant that the bunker needed to accommodate 12 full-size submarines at any given time. 3 submarines in a row and 4 rows of submarines next to each other. The last step before the submarine could leave the bunker was a dive test in a chamber that would have been directly connected to the river Weser, close to the North Sea. This dive was supposed to detect any kinds of defects, but specifically leaks in the complex piping. Okay, it turns out that I only live 2 hours away from a still existing Type 21 submarine. Let's go. Okay, we are now on the Autobahn in the direction of Bremerhaven. We have roughly 45 minutes left. And let me just provide a rough context of the importance of the submarine. So the Type 21 is considered to be the first real submarine in history. Using superior technology, it was equipped with an autoloader, allowing it to shoot torpedoes in a short succession. It also had the capability to stay submerged for an extended period of time. Prior submarines were comparable to regular surface ships, but with the ability to submerge for a short period of time. So those submarines would usually sail above the waterline and only submerge when they encounter a target they wanted to attack. The U-21, however, is specifically designed to stay submerged for an extended period of time, up to 75 minutes. It was also capable of reaching depths up to 1,000 feet. Using its powerful electrical dual engines, it had a reasonable speed underwater and was capable of outmaneuvering Allied forces trying to attack the submarine. Okay, so we've just arrived at Bremerhaven, where we have an actual Type 21 submarine. It's a museum, and yeah, we are just going there and see if we can find it and what we see there. So we have finally arrived at a real U-21 submarine, and yeah, you can already see from the front there's this torpedo tube. It's open. The original boat had 6 of those tubes. So if you have a look on the submarine, first thing you realize is that it's looking pretty normal, pretty modern. It doesn't look like a more than 60-year-old submarine. Also, compared to other submarines in this era, it doesn't have the huge cannon at the bow, which makes it much more fast underwater. This huge cannon was replaced with those anti-aircraft guns in the front of the tower and at the back. And in the middle of the tower you can see the snorkels. Those snorkels would go out when the submarine is submerged. And yeah, the submarine could still use its diesel engines and charge the batteries. And those snorkels have been coated with a specific material that made it impossible to find it by radar. So another very interesting detail you can see is that the submarine is not one single tube, but it's made of individual parts and individual plates. And you can see very clearly that it has been welded together out of multiple elements. So this is a very interesting detail. So down there you can actually see an electrical engine that was driving this submarine. And this is the exact engine that Karl Dönitz was standing next to in our introduction. We are now standing on a dike that is going along the river Weser. This river is actually so close to the North Sea that it's subject to tides. At the moment we have high tide, so we do not see the effect. So on this side is the North Sea, and roughly 20 miles in this direction, there's Bunker Valentine, and this is where we are now going. Okay, we are now on the way to the bunker. The construction started in 1942. Roughly 1 million tons of sand, 130,000 tons of concrete and 20,000 tons of steel have been used for the construction. It is not a fortified dry dock for the repair and maintenance of submarines. It is a production line for submarines in a fortified bunker. And this place is really unique. There's no other place in the world like this. I can't wait to see it. So we have just arrived at Bunker Valentine, and on this side you can directly see a big opening in the bunker, and this opening is the opening to the dive chamber where the final tests of the submarine would have been conducted. Any kind of dive test, tube testing, pressure testing, everything would be happening here, and we are standing actually on a dike that would have been dug out. And on this side you can see the River Weser, and there would have been a direct connection to the River Weser where the submarines would enter, and from the River Weser directly go to the North Sea, and from the North Sea to the Atlantic. But since the project has never been finished, this dugout never happened, and the dike is still as it is. On this side, you can pretty much see that the bunker is getting old. These white spots are oxidations of the concrete, and also you can see in some parts the concrete is crumbling apart. So it's really breaking and falling off. Actually, there's no idea how to proceed with the bunker. So it is too huge to demolish it manually. It would be too expensive. And it's also too massive to just demolish it with explosive. Nearby, people are living in their houses, and if you would just work with explosives here, the houses would be damaged. So at the moment, the bunker is an exhibition, as a memorial, but there's no other plans at the moment. The bunker was attacked by the Allies in 1945. I always wondered why they waited so many years with the destruction and waited for a completion of 90% before they started to attack. And it didn't make any sense, because the submarines at that time were pretty successful in warfare. And why would you wait so long with the destruction? And the reason is pretty brilliant. Actually, this bunker here consumed so many resources, concrete, steel, workforce, that the Allied forces basically wanted to have all the resources allocated here so they cannot be used for the production of conventional weapons. It is estimated that roughly 300 Tiger tanks could be built only from this steel here, or 1 million rifles. And if those rifles have been built and the tanks, they would have been used in conventional warfare. And this is what the Allied forces wanted to avoid. So here you can actually see the opening of the bunker where the pre-produced elements from all over Europe would arrive. So they would enter basically through this gigantic hole and be then assembled in a production line, like in a modern car factory, and then just move to the right. In order to build such a gigantic bunker like Bunker Valentine, you need many buildings to support this construction. Here you can see actually that there are many side buildings for the preparation of concrete, for the preparation of steel, and there's a canteen, and also the transformer station for the electricity. So it's not only the bunker, but it's also really a lot of side buildings, and those side buildings are allocated here on this side. It's totally overgrown by nature. It's not open to public, but the buildings are still there. build such a gigantic construction, you need a lot of concrete. And here you can see some remains of a concrete mixing facility. So at least what is left. This is one that is accessible to the public, but also around the bunker, you have many buildings like this. So we are now seeing the dive chamber. This is the last step. The submarine needed to be processed and then go out on the other side to the River Weser. There is no canal being dug yet since the project was never finished. But this is the last step where they did the dive test and see if the piping was correct. And also on the ceiling, you can see the ceiling is pretty thick. But nevertheless, a bomb could go right through it. We just arrived here in a part of the bunker where we have gigantic beamers projecting a documentary on the walls. It's very interesting. It looks very nice. I don't want to show too much, so you can come and enjoy it yourself, but really fantastic work. So here you see the graphic that I tried to animate previously in the video, and we are actually standing right here, and when you have a look here, this is the way where the submarines would go for the final test. And there you also can see the water already where they have been tested for the diving capabilities and if all the pressure pipes and so on are correctly assembled. So we are now in the part of the bunker that is heavily destroyed and is not supposed to be entered. So on the top you can see a hole in the ceiling from the bombing. The structure made of concrete and steel is called a dead man hanging because it looks like a person hanging from the ceiling. And also if you look a little bit further in the distance, you can see holes everywhere from the bombing 1945. And what is also very interesting actually this bit here. So this is actually a shrapnel of the bomb that hit and made this ceiling here in 1945. So you can see it's a gigantic place, and imagine it would be full with submarines here. So as impressive as Bunker Valentine, the technology and the submarine Type 21 is, let's do not forget who actually built the structure. 12,000 prisoners from all over Europe have been involved in the construction. 3,000 up to 6,000 people have died. Officially, it's only 1,700. The Nazis love to document everything, but when they realized they will inevitably lose the war, they started to destroy all the documents documenting their war crimes. The conditions have been horrible. Prisoners have been working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there is a statement from a camp doctor I want to read to you. Ich erkläre mehrfach Magen- und Darmentzündung als Folge von bestehendem Hungergefühl, verursacht durch schwere körperliche Arbeit. Die Gefangenen stopfen dann die unglaublichsten Dinge in sich hinein. So it's really horrible, and I didn't even want to read it to you, but I think it's part of the history. So we have now left Bunker Valentine to find a place that is horrible beyond imagination. The area we are looking for is roughly 1 mile away from the bunker. And when I heard about the story, I actually decided to make this video. The area we are trying to find has been used by the Kriegsmarine to store oil. Roughly 20 gigantic oil tanks have been located in this area. During that time of the war, resources have not been available: wood, nails, or even the workforce. But the prisoners that built Bunker Valentine needed to be accommodated close to the construction. And by now, me saying gigantic oil tank accommodation, you probably figured out what the Nazis did. Some of those oil tanks have been repurposed, and prisoners have been housed inside the tanks. So I cannot imagine how horrible the conditions have been. The residue of oil, the heat in the summer, the cold in the winter. I wouldn't like to sleep there even for one night. But let's try to find what is left of those tanks, since this area have been heavily bombarded in 1945. We have found this little plate here. It says that this is part of the concentration camp Neungamme, and I think we are very close to the tanks at the moment. So we have just found one of those oil tanks, at least what is left over. So it's basically only the base plate made out of concrete. Because of the bombardment, everything else is destroyed. Over there we have seen some remains of other oil tanks, but it's really destroyed. You cannot even see that it was an oil tank. Other than this, we have this little plate here reminding what happened here during the World War II period, and that people have been dying here. And they have been dying in such rates that also over there have been a dedicated burial ground. So Bunker Valentine had a dedicated burial ground for the prisoners dying because of the hard conditions. Luckily, after the war was over, those prisoners have been exhumed and properly buried in their countries. Other than this, it feels surreal because people are walking their dogs, families are riding their bikes. Nothing reminds you what happened here many years ago during the World War.